Hey everybody, welcome back to the Downpour Emerald City Hockey's and Circling Seattle Sports Seattle Torrent podcast. What's that about? Got some big news as we kick off this podcast, and that is that we are going to be partnering with Circling Seattle Sports and Charles over there at CSS for the Downpour moving forward. Charles has been doing obviously great coverage of all Seattle sports everywhere. We talk about him all the time. Nothing but good things to say about him. And as both him and the rest of the CSS team and us over here on the Emerald City hockey side of things have been working on covering both the Torrent and the Seattle Kraken, realized that there's a lot of times where people need to be in two places at once, including today, and things get a little complicated and could probably benefit from, a partnership, a sharing of things. And so we're going to be doing that moving forward with Charles. Going to have him on the podcast in just a little bit. Going to be talking with RJ first, and then I'll be talking with Charles a little bit later on for this one. It also frees us up as we're looking forward to the next calendar year, RJ, less than a month away before we hit 2026. And that's, of course, when we're going to be launching the Red Glare podcast and kind of then also expanding our reach over into the broader NHL conversation and side of things. And I know you're really busy. You're working now on branding and trying to get all of that stuff handled. So this way, it just kind of allows us to work on that, continue to cover both of these teams. It's just going to make things a lot smoother for everybody kind of across the board covering Seattle hockey.
For sure. And I mean, I'll kind of be running point on the Red Glare project. And so that's a lot of extra work, but I'm really excited for this partnership. I think that's the number one thing, right? Partnering with Charles. I mean, look, nobody covers women's sports in this city like Charles does and like CSS does. So joining forces, it was just a no brainer given that he was interested. And I think really our biggest goal with this is to just kind of help gather interest and grow interest in the sport and women's
Mhm.
hockey. We both love women's hockey. We both want to see the torrent and the sport itself succeed. And so I figure joining forces like that should only be a benefit to everybody.
Yeah, exactly. So really excited about this. And again, we'll talk more about it when Charles joins me in just a little bit. Real quick, before we get into breaking down the two games that the Seattle Torrents have already played here, RJ, just a quick injury update. Of course, in that first game, Teralova went awkwardly into the boards, kind of got pinned against the boards awkwardly, right leg, suffered something, not entirely sure what it is because this is, professional hockey team after all, so they're not going to tell us anything. But Terlova had to be helped off the ice, looked really rough, briefly returned in that first game and then had to exit again, missed the second game. Terlova is skating either before or after practices, has been doing that skating so far this week. See what her involvement is tomorrow. Didn't practice today, so I'm guessing she'll probably miss the game tomorrow, in which case Kayla Barnes will again fill in up on that top D pair playing with Emily Brown for Teralova. But it's at least a positive that she's skating because when we saw that injury in the first game, I mean, we had people like in the Discord being like, that could be a really bad hipish injury. I was worried about maybe like a broken leg because of how it happened and the way her leg got pinned there, her upper thigh. It's just been a good thing that kind of pretty much immediately she was able to start skating on her own. And we watched her skating earlier. It looked like, again, not going through physical drills or anything, but looked like things were okay.
Yeah, I know it looked all right. Again, not pushing it too hard, and I
Mhm.
think that's when the return to practice would be. But I think the biggest takeaway from that is just that the more extreme options, because it looked like it could have been very potentially bad. Potentially broken leg, ligament stuff. I think we can rule all that out with the fact that she's skating now, and so should be sooner rather than later. And especially with how spaced out the schedule is. I don't know about tomorrow, but beyond that, she's got a real chance, I would think.
Yeah, definitely. And then the other one was Jenna Buglioni, who was dealing with something and was like labeled day to day coming out of that last game against the Minnesota Frost. Missed the one practice, but then has since been practicing every day with the team and seems good to go there. No red, no contact jersey, nothing like that. She seems like she's ready to go. So that is the quick injury update. Before we talk about the first two games that the Torrent have played, games that have meant something, RJ, and games that we could watch. Because, of course, we could not watch those preseason scrimmage games against the Vancouver Golden Knights. We actually have real Seattle Torrent hockey that we have seen, regular season games. These do matter in the standings. Unfortunately, in the standings, they have not mattered a lot for the Seattle Torrent as they lose in overtime to Vancouver on that opening game and then fall to the Frost in that last one 3-0. But overall, RJ, what have you thought of how the Seattle Torrent have been playing?
I think it's more or less in line with what we were expecting in terms of just the sloppiness early on, the bit disjointed that you would expect from any expansion team. And I think really one of the bigger indicators of that side of it is also just how Vancouver has done. Because of course they played each other in the first game, but in the second game, Vancouver, the Golden Knights go on to lose to Ottawa, the Torrent lose to Minnesota. And so I think you're seeing a little bit, especially when you watch the game, the passes aren't connecting 100%. They're just still building that chemistry. I think that's the number one takeaway, but it's the thing that we most expected, right? That part, not a big concern for me, but I think it still is really a factor in the results so far, especially when you face a team that, like Minnesota, the back-to-back champs that are just going to be locked in and can make you pay for all of those sorts of things. That said, I'm seeing the talent. Like I definitely see the foundation of where this team could be heading, because when things do click for them, when they do have plays that kind of connect and that work, and you see it especially in the first game against Vancouver, where both teams have that bit of disjointedness, right? So it evens out. You can see the talent there, and especially with some of the breakout players that you highlighted last week, uh, they have lived up to expectations, I think.
Yeah, I mean, when was the last time we've done a head coach media availability after a team has lost a game 3-0, right? And coach seemed largely unbothered, right? And very much like, look, it's a long season. We know what we need to do. We know what we need to work on. We handled some stuff really well today. We're going to keep working on the stuff that we know we need to improve on. But that's very much the tone and the things that head coach Steve O'Rourke were talking about after that 3-0 loss to the Frost. It was very, very calm, just like I said, did not seem rocked by the result at all, really, after either of these two games and the little bit of the slow start that the Torrent do seem to be off of. You talked about the struggles that Vancouver has also had. I mean, they've played 3 games now, allowed 13 goals against. They are the worst in the league in terms of goals against per game. Seattle, then the one team above them that is doing a little bit better than that. Like it's clear when you look at the goals against per game, these two expansion teams, that is the area that they're going to be struggling with early on because so much of playing defense, the communication between the goalie and the D core in front of them, the forwards, and them understanding where they need to be when back checking, like it just relies so much more off of muscle memory and communication than really any other part of hockey requires. So much of the rest of it, you could just kind of go off of feel and things like that. That defense and really locking things down on the back end really requires you to be the most in sync of anything that you're doing out there, and both of these teams really struggling with it. Of the legacy teams, the original 6 teams, Ottawa is the worst when it comes to goals against per game. They're at 2.5 goals allowed per game. Seattle's at 3.5, and Vancouver's at 4.33. So again, it just kind of gives an idea that for these expansion teams, even though they have very good players, and again, I've talked about this, the Seattle blue line is on paper arguably the best in the PWHL, just not having that communication, not having that chemistry down yet, it's huge. And it really is something that shows up out there. And I think that we've seen that through the first 2 games here. That being said, one of the things that head coach Steve O'Rourke really highlighted after that game against Minnesota, and I do think that this showed up on the ice, was Minnesota is a team that obviously they're back-to-back champions. They're very in sync with each other. They know what they want to be doing out there, but they also really rely on speed to really pressure other teams. And he felt that the Torrent actually did a good job of taking away that speed a lot. And that was really the thing that they had highlighted defensively going into that game against Minnesota. And they were largely able to do it there. They were able to keep Kendall Coyne Schofield off the board for the most part. Keep Ridicurl off the board for the most part. Unfortunately, you get then beat in other areas, and also from that line, right? As you do allow then the two goals to page won't load. There we go. To
Panic
Kelly
and Van
Panic.
Ginkel, yeah.
Right. Like so you do end up having that component to it, but it does feel like that's something where if already in game two, O'Rourke was able to kind of game plan defensively for another team and you were largely able to go out there and execute on that, that bodes pretty well for the rest of the season and as you get going and you're able to get more practices and everything under your belt. I mean, I was talking about it earlier. This makes like a month. This week makes a month of them actually being on the ice together. It's so crazy to think about like how fast this is all come together.
Yeah, this only really happens in this league, right? I mean, even with NHL expansion teams, they get longer than a month on the ice, really, with training camp and everything before they're playing, multiple games together. And with this expansion kind of thrown together as quickly as it was, yeah, it's a different process. And I agree with you on the, in the Minnesota game about stopping the speed and those chances. You look at where Minnesota scored their goals. I think the first panic goal, it's just a tough bounce off
Yeah.
off a defender and then over the glove and off the post. And but the second panic goal, that's just a breakout gone wrong.
Mhm.
And that's the kind of thing that as you tighten those things up, as you build the chemistry, that's not going to happen later in the season. And the third one, kind of just a net front jam type of play. But like the way that they normally score is not how they scored in
Right.
that game. And so like that I think that speaks well of the coach and just trying to get the team on that page of, okay, here's watching film, here's what we need to prevent.
Right. And then you look at the other side of that game, RJ, and of course they were not able to score, but it was not for lack of chances. Seattle Torrent get 30 shots on goal, just it could not get a bounce at all to save their lives. You look at especially that top line of Alex Carpenter centering, Hillary Knight, and Julia Gosling. Of course, Julia Gosling able to score twice in that opening game against Vancouver. We'll talk about those in a second. That line was so able to dominate out there against Minnesota. I mean, it seemed like every single shift was played almost exclusively in Minnesota's end of the ice, but every single time there was a rebound or a redirection or something like that, it just felt like the puck had, a reverse magnetic field where it was just going to go as far away from any sort of open ice as possible and just completely find a Minnesota defender or just find its way into Nicole Hensley's glove or something like that, and she was just going to be able to lock it down and freeze it out. It felt very like traditional Kraken, like, right? Obviously, we're making plenty of jokes about that up on the press bridge. CPA is cursed. Actually, that's what it all is. It's both teams now, but it really felt like, look, at least, the top six for the Seattle Torrent in that game was able to pretty much dominate things in terms of possession. It was just that, and they were getting the looks that I think they wanted as well, especially with the cross ice passing. They love going for those backdoor plays, particularly that Carpenter Knight Gosling line. All of that stuff was there for them. It was just something tiny always just happened to go wrong, and that's what kept them off the board.
Yeah, I mean, 5 shots apiece for that top line, Gosling, Knight, and Carpenter with 5 shots on goal each in that game, which, I mean, that amounts to half the team's 30 in the game. So that line was really going, really buzzing. I mean, I think the biggest example of the puck luck or lack thereof was Hillary Knight, backdoor with the goalie pulled at the end. How often does that chance not go in for it? She kind of sends it back the other way. Like it just wasn't, the bounces weren't going. And I do want to credit Nicole Hensley. She was awesome.
Yeah.
She had a great game. Like it was not just the defending, it was goaltending as well for Minnesota. But like again, for all those reasons, like I'm not particularly worried. I guess overall, Dylan, like what's your level of worry given where the Torrent are in the standings, the fact that they haven't won a game yet? Because for me, it's still pretty low.
It's very low for me, especially because, and I talked about this the last time we had this podcast, and we talked about the kind of the going into the season, and we were previewing the team and everything, and I talked because I had asked head coach Steve O'Rourke about this specifically, like what, kind of how it's been installing his systems and the expectations around when things should kind of start clicking for the group. And I mean, his answer last time was, you know, we have checkpoints throughout the season that we're just hoping to hit, and really we're hoping to make a big push the last month of the season. Obviously, we're a very far ways away from the last month of the season, but I think already we're seeing growth from games 1 to game 2. I think we're gonna see that for game 3 as well. I think it is beneficial for this team that they get to start off with a lot of home games. The only road game for their first, what is it, 5 this first 6 games was that Vancouver home opener. All their games are at
Yeah.
home here, and I think that for an expansion club, the fact that you're gonna be able to continuously play in your own barn in front of record-setting crowds, we can talk about that in a second, um, and practice at your facility, I think that that's gonna be huge for them. You don't have to worry about trying to figure out the communication stuff and where everybody is and really settle on building that chemistry between D partners and line mates up front for the forward group. The fact that you just get to kind of deal with all of that stuff at home, you don't have to worry about the travel and everything like that. I think that's going to be big for them. And I think that that's going to really help them start hitting their stride here soon. I think also you played the other, kind of quote unquote best team in Vancouver, best team on paper anyway, Vancouver. You had to play them game 1. It went to overtime. It's not like that was a bad performance. It went to overtime. You just didn't get the bounces at the end. And then you had to play probably the most complete and team-oriented team in the entire league in Minnesota, back-to-back league champions. Both years of existence for the PWHL, Minnesota has won, and they've won with a very team-centric style of game. They are the exact opposite of you, where you maybe have that additional talent on paper, but you have zero experience with one another. This is a Minnesota group where I think it was like 17 of them have played both years together. This is their third season playing together. They very much know what they want to be doing. They have that experience and that chemistry with each other. They have the shorthand. They have the intuition of where each other's going to be out there. So they know when they can go to make a play. They know somebody's going to be in this area of the ice. I could just send the puck there. Torrent have none of that. And so I think that you're looking at this and you're saying, well, they don't have a win yet. Or if somebody's looking at this and saying they don't have a win yet, they're supposed to be so good. Were you really supposed to beat that Minnesota team? That Minnesota team should beat up on the two expansion teams, frankly. Like that's kind of how it should work early on in the season. And again, you lost an overtime game to Vancouver, who's the other team that can kind of match you on paper with that skill set. I'm just so not worried about this group. I think we'll know a lot with them playing New York. New York was a team that struggled last year, looks okay this year. I think that's going to be a better bar for kind of where this group is going to be just based off of that.
Yeah, no, I think you're right about that. I mean, it should be the easiest of the three matchups so far, maybe, although they did beat Vancouver 5-1 the other day. So it's the kind of thing too where I love having the 5 games at home, right? They don't have to go out on the road till December 28th for a game in New
Mhm.
York, and that'll also allow you a bunch of time to practice. Like that's the other great thing. And it's something that Vancouver doesn't really have. Of course, they had their home opener, for the first game, but then they go out on the road for 3 games. I think that's another reason for their struggles. And the reason I bring up Vancouver so much is just because, of course, they're the other expansion team. Like they're the other comparable team that's kind of going through what you are right now, but they have to go on the road immediately to Ottawa, to New York, and they're really struggling with that. And I think that's a problem that the Torrent are not going to have because they have this long homestand, and just allowing you to practice at your own facility is going to be huge. And I mean, even like yesterday and today, they've taken advantage of that.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm with you. I think that that stuff's gonna be good. Now we did talk about the struggles defensively, and I look at both these games. You mentioned it earlier. The second Minnesota goal was kind of off of a problematic breakout. You look at the first goal against in Seattle Torrent history was of course a bad breakout. Sarah Nurse able to intercept the pass in the neutral zone, come in and score on you. That has been an area of difficulty for the Torrent so far. And again, it makes sense. That's something that really relies on communication and chemistry, especially because I think now that we've seen 2 games, we're starting to get a little bit of an idea of how Steve O'Rourke wants this team playing. This is a team that wants to be aggressive with those breakouts, right? Like we're seeing the Seattle Torrent defenders really having to do some fairly long stretch passes to get the puck up into the neutral zone. There is not like it's not like an incremental breakout where it's like maybe the defender deep in the D zone sends it to the blue line and then a forward picks it up there and then maybe moves it up to the next blue line. This is very much Seattle Torrent defender gets it deep in the zone, and is trying to send it to the far blue line. And I think that that's something that it requires a lot of timing, it requires a lot of consistency, it requires a lot of help from the forwards in the neutral zone to make sure that they're where they need to be to either pick up that puck or at the very least kind of run interference so that the other team can't step up and intercept it, because that's really what we've seen from both Vancouver and Minnesota. They've been able to just have forwards just kind of swoop in and pick off those passes because that's a really long pass to be sending out there. It feels kind of like a low percentage play. I'm wondering if we're going to see them adjust that, or like I said, we'll see the forwards kind of pick it up and kind of make an adjustment on their end. But that has been arguably the only thing that I've found kind of curious and maybe at times questionable with the Seattle Torrent, is just this idea that all the breakouts have to be almost home run shots to get the team moving up the ice with speed.
Yeah, I mean, I am curious about your thoughts on that too, because it's a high risk, high reward type of
Mhm,
strategy, right? And the other thing is we've noted even like, a couple years ago with with like the Kraken trying to run that sort of thing, is that it requires you to have very skilled players. Like
mhm,
you kind of need the horses to run that system, or else you are going to lose out quite often. How do you feel about that decision? Because it feels like one of those that, especially early on, like you can't really expect it to work out very well when you don't have that chemistry down. And we're seeing the results of that right now.
mhm.
But is it the kind of thing that, I guess, if you dedicate yourself to it from the start, by the end of the season, if you're completing those passes, if you're getting the puck up the ice that quickly, other teams are going to have no way of dealing with it and of countering it. Like, I don't know. Do you agree with that decision? I don't know. Do you think it'll work out?
I mean, I think it'll start working more than it's working right now, but I am worried that it's maybe a little bit too aggressive of an approach to take, just because it is a low percentage play at any level, right? Like port that over to the NHL, port that over to Major Junior, port that over to Bantam. It's a low percentage play because the puck has to just clear so much ice. And it is just so many opportunities along the way for anyone from the other team to step into that lane and pick it off. I would like to see personally, especially with the top 6 forward group that you have out there, and I'm sure that, partly why he's doing this is because he feels like they have the skill players to pull this off, and especially on the back end, that they have, defenders that can send the puck up the ice and do this. I though look at this forward group and I look at especially that top 6, and I look at, Sardakny and the speed that she has. I look at Hannah Bilka and the speed that she has, Alex Carpenter, the speed that she has. Send them from your own blue line, right? Like make the breakout up to them at your own blue line. Let them build a head of steam and gain the zone. Like they can handle that. Like they're skilled. Let them gain the zone, let their wingers follow them in, and then try to make the play off of that and kind of attack off the rush there. I don't know that you're really going to allow the D or the other team to set up that much more in the D zone if you were to make that pass, but to one of those speedier players. I think it's still going to, largely put them back on their heels, and you're going to be able to try to get, odd player opportunities there. I don't know. At least early on in the season, I think I would go with that because I just don't know that it could work right now.
Yeah, I mean, early on in the season, for sure, it's going to be rough. I mean, just one thing I think about though, after watching those two games, particularly the Minnesota game, is for Minnesota, like it's so hard to get them out of their structure. And I think one of the areas where the Torrent maybe struggled a little bit is they could get some offensive zone time. I mean, they got a cycle going.
Mhm.
They did that fairly often. They got some shots, decent shots on net, but especially you look at the shot map, which by the way, I love that for these like game recaps, they have a really good looking shot map
Yeah.
on the PWHL website, and you compare it to Minnesota's, and I think that's another like issue that you mentioned to me during the game, just the ability to get out, get inside, and get to those high danger scoring areas. You look at where a lot of the shots came from for Seattle, and they are further back. They're
Mhm.
along the outside, and in the PWHL, that's the area of the ice in the D zone that your opponent's going to allow you to have.
Yeah.
Where you kind of circle around the outside. And the only way to really circumvent that against, especially against a structured team like Minnesota, is to quickly move the puck up to get those rush type chances. This early in the season, yeah, like I don't think there's a way to really expect it to work, but I do wonder about, the the likelihood of generating the chances that are actually going to score if it's worth the risk to do something like that.
Right. No, I'm with you. And we'll see against New York. I mean, New York so far this year anyway has been more of an offensive team, and so I think you're going to have to deal with things there and try to slow them down cuz they're just, they're leading the league in scoring, right? Generating 3 goals per game so far. I am curious to see about that, and with the D, like, cuz that was the other thing that I guess confused me. Not really confused me because I understood what they were doing, especially after hearing O'Rourke talk about it afterwards. But yes, your D was extremely aggressive, trying to slow Minnesota down and not let them beat you with their like kind of normal system. But that required your D to play far out to the perimeter a lot, and they did cede a lot of ground then on the inside to the Frost. And I don't know that one is a sustainable path to success, but I also don't know that that's the game plan moving forward, right? Like it feels like through both games, the long breakouts, the long stretch passes, that is very much part of the team identity. We didn't really see the D play that aggressive against Vancouver, not to the same extent that we did against the Frost. So I'm kind of waiting to see what that D zone approach is, and maybe it's just going to change game by game based off of opponent, and we'll kind of go from there. But yes, there was plenty of times where the D felt like they were just miles out of position because they were aggressively chasing somebody up to like the half boards. Like we're not talking about like going off to into the corner or stuff kind of down and around the goal line. Like they were aggressively moving up the ice to try to challenge people along the boards pretty high up in the defensive zone. And then if that player was able to beat them or get the puck out of there, it meant then that there was just a lot of open ice for the Frost to attack and to make plays with. And you know, Schroeder did a great job of standing tall and being able to make a lot of saves. But again, it was one of those where like they had to really rely on her to step up and make those saves at times. And so I'm curious though to see if that continues because it was a problem in that Minnesota game. I understood afterwards with the context of why that was happening, but it's one of those, like, I guess if you do that only situationally against certain teams, maybe it makes sense, but it was something that I was also questioning when we were watching the game up there on the press bridge.
Yeah, I mean, with a 2-game sample size, like, it's
It
still
is
so
tough.
hard as we're trying to do this podcast and get gauge patterns from only 2 games. It's gonna be a lot easier for us as the season goes on. Like, I share that struggle with you where I'm like, "Yeah, I don't know if this is, like, part of the systems or is this just an adjustment for one specific opponent?" I don't know, and it's too early to know.
Yeah. So far throughout the season, everybody is playing to kind of what we talked about last time on the pod about what everybody's kind of like basic player identity is. That's largely what we've seen. I already highlighted it earlier. That top line has just been absolutely dominant as far as possession metrics and stuff goes. The limited sample size that we have of both games played as well as data becoming available for us. Um, Two people I want to highlight though: Alex Carpenter on that line, winning 70% basically on the faceoff so far this season. Probably not going to stay at that level for the full 30 games, but definitely getting the job done there. And then yeah, Julia Gosling, who picks up the 2 goals in the first period against Vancouver, highlighted her as a breakout player both on this
Take your victory
podcast.
lap.
I know, both on this podcast and then also on Charles's podcast. That's another reason we're going to be partnering with him. Realize we're just kind of cross pollinating constantly on these podcasts around this team. Might as well just join forces on one podcast for everybody. Um, Julia Gosling's shot is just so elite. And we saw it on display in that one. And it's not just the shot, it's also the size and her ability to battle and get to the net front, right? And I think that that's what we saw with the 2 goals from Julia Gosling. That first one was more of like net front battle, get there, get inside position on the D, be able to be there for rebounds, all of that kind of stuff. And then the second one, it was just that shot from distance. She's able to place it in the corners pretty perfectly every time. We saw that during a drill earlier today where they're all just kind of lining up and try to pick corners. Julia Gosling is able to do it just every single time, automatic. And we saw that from the second goal there, which was also good response goal for the Torrent in that first game. I know we've mostly focused on the Frost game just because it's been it's more recent, but I thought that that was a good one because it was coming. It was less than 2 minutes prior that you had that brutal turnover to Sarah Nurse, who's of course going to make you pay if you're just going to serve up a breakaway opportunity to her like that. But Julia Gosling in that top line was able to go out there, battle hard, rip the shot from distance, and just look fantastic. So definitely feeling good about that breakout player pick. Waiting on Serdachny to kind of show up in the same way, but I will say Serdachny did get third star in that game against Minnesota, and it was her and her line that was primarily tasked with slowing down that top line for the Minnesota Frost. And again, on paper, it looks like they didn't necessarily do a great job with that because Panic was able to get those 2 goals. But you also weren't letting the 2 players on the outside that you normally would have to worry about beat you. I mean, I believe Kelly Panic only had 2 goals, 4 goals all of last season. So again, that is the player that you would say, "Hey, beat us," and unfortunately, she did. But Serdachny and that second line with Hannah Bilka and Jesse Eldridge, they were tasked with the tough defensive assignment in that one, and they did largely do their job.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, it certainly hasn't been like disappointed or anything from Serdachny. It's just defensively, but just when you play a game when you get shut out, it's going to hurt the numbers for everybody. And I mean,
Yeah.
last thing on Gosling, that shot. And one thing I've noticed too, watching especially the PWHL games and practices in person, the difference in speed on shots from say the hardest shot on the team to the least hard shot on the team is so much greater than what I'm used to.
Hmm.
And so somebody who can just absolutely rip it like that, so valuable. I mean, we've known that about Hillary Knight forever. Like that's
Yeah.
nothing new we need to talk about. But I think Gosling brings a similar level of shot, and it can just be overpowering, like it was on her second goal.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm telling you, just being there, hearing the sound it makes and everything, it's different from anybody else out there on the team and on the ice. I'm totally with you there. The last thing that I want to talk to you about, and then we'll transition over to talking with Charles, is PWHL as a whole because we did get some news on expansion, something that has been heavily rumored, but we actually have a league official going on the record and talking about it and basically saying that they are, in fact, looking at expanding next season. And that the plan is to shoot for 4 teams. And look, I think that it's an aggressive expansion approach. We talked about that with both Seattle and Vancouver already, right? Kind of how fast everything's coming together. I do think that a 12-team league makes a lot of sense. You could have 2 conferences of 6 teams. You could have a West and an East. I think that that would put the league in a very healthy position. You could have all of the markets that want a team and are going to be able to support a team and all of that stuff. You're going to be solid from a revenue standpoint in that regard. It'll help with the travel expenses because right now you have teams really far apart. So by having interconference play and stuff take precedent, that'll probably help on the expense front with everything. It just the idea that again you just expanded 2 teams, you're going to expand again, try to shoot for 4 and have them play next year is the part that keeps getting me with this league. RJ is just this idea that you're just trying to go for it all as fast as possible. Instead, you could have just done like a full 6-team expansion maybe for next year, but really worked out all the details with all the markets this year. I'm just kind of curious your thoughts on everything.
Yeah, I mean, I have those concerns certainly about how quickly everything was slapped together this year. And where it's still some things incomplete. You look at like the jerseys versus the logo and identity, just as an indicator of it, but also the expansion draft process and how contentious that was, and I think would continue to be in another year. I mean, what's the expansion draft rules going to look like for this coming expansion draft, right? Like, is every team just going to get gutted and there's 4 teams picking now? Like, that's something you really want to get down and game test and soon. Like, you got to be doing that right now if you're
Yeah.
thinking about expansion for 4 teams this off season. So it's just a lot of work in addition to the lots of work that's continuing to go on as you have Seattle and Vancouver in their first seasons, and the rest of your franchises as well. I understand the temptation, especially when you look at the home opener attendance numbers for each team. I mean, Chris
Mhm.
Sinclair put that out, just comparing it all for every team in the league. And yeah, you've got Seattle leading the way with over 16,000. Next, Vancouver with a little under 15,000. And then after that, it's Minnesota with 9,000, Montreal and Toronto with 8, Ottawa with 7, Boston with 5, and New York with 3.5. When you look at those numbers for home opener attendance, and you're the league, the PWHL, and you look at your two recent expansion teams kind of leading the way and topping those numbers. Again, we'll see what the second and third games are attendance wise, but like that's pretty tempting, right? Like I understand the temptation there, but I have a lot of concerns about the logistics of how specifically it will work out. I'm with you on the 12 team thing generally making sense,
Mhm.
but man, this is fast.
It is very fast, and I mean, it's not just the attendance too, right? It was also jersey sales and Seattle and Vancouver pacing what the other teams were able to do there. Like both of these markets made so much sense to have teams. And I'm obviously super excited that Seattle has a team and that everything is largely worked out and all of that's positive. And yes, had the record breaking attendance, over 16,000 people at Climate Pledge Arena for that home opener. Absolutely incredible. Loved seeing that. It was so special to be a part of. But when it comes to exactly the expansion draft process now, and especially if it's an expansion draft for 4 teams, the one thing that I really worry about with such a young league such as this, again, it's only the 3rd year that the PWHL has played, only the 2nd year that they're playing a full, like, proper season even.
Mhm.
If you continue to have expansion drafts where you have such high profile and high level players moving around, what does that do to the existing fans and the people who have been there since day one, who potentially are going to have just a handful of players, and certainly at the high end, only 1 or 2 players left over from the team that they really came in, showed that incredible support years 1 and 2, and really helped establish the proper foundation and footing that this league needed to then go and look at expansion and feel like that they were in a place that they could add 2 teams on the West Coast and now add 4 more teams. If you like, you need stars to stay placed in certain markets to keep those fan bases going, right? Like you don't want to just keep sacrificing fans in certain markets just to bring in new ones in new markets. I worry about it like with the Torrent. Could have a great season this year. What does expansion look like if you can only keep 3 players and 4 teams are taking it? Like you're going to have very little turnover. You're going to have very little consistency year 1 to year 2 next year. And what does that do to the fan base? What does that do to somebody who's gone out there and bought a jersey with a player's name on it if just immediately they're stolen by a team in Denver or Detroit, right?
And
Like
that's a lot of people.
yes, it's a
Like,
ton of people. And so I do think that that's something that they have to figure out is, how do we keep a certain number of star players, very good players in each market so that fans have those players, young kids going to these games have those players that they can look up to and they can kind of consistently follow because that is how you build fan bases is through that consistency. And I think that for any young league, that's extremely important and you want to make sure that that's a top priority, and I worry about if they just kind of rerun the expansion draft based off of what they did before, that you just aren't going to have a lot of that consistency and the more casual fan approach is going to suffer from it. And I think that this is a league that needs those casual fans to start then becoming diehard fans. One of the top ways sports fans go from casual to diehard is by following a team year after year and falling in love with those players and wanting to support them and want to buy their jersey and want to watch them year over year within their market. And right now that this league has not done a good job at facilitating that.
right. I mean, I think it's a centerpiece of all sports, right? Fans connect with players. What concerns me too about the way that it could potentially go down is just that I think, especially in a league like this, where if you are a women's hockey fan or even, women's sports fan, you understand the issue of having to grow the game and grow the league. And I think probably more understanding than most as just as group of fans that, okay, yes, we might have to lose a good player or two, but it's for the larger good of the league doing well and bringing in revenue and being able to grow so we can all continue to enjoy this sport that it's been on thin ice at various times, right? You want the league to do well, and that's not a given. But when you have the expansion draft process the way it was this last time, and then potentially again the next year, I think fans could deal with one kind of rug pull. I know that's what it felt like for the original 6 teams, right?
Yeah.
You get to love these players, these star players, Hillary Knight, Sarah Nurse, and then the rug's pulled out from under you and your team gets gutted. You can maybe deal with that once in the name of, okay, well, the league needs to grow. We need to do the right things. But twice in back-to-back years, it's a lot to be asking of fans. Like the fact that it is twice versus you brought up the alternative of like if you just waited a couple of years, do all six, and you're like, okay, well, this is the big expansion. We're gonna lose a lot of quality players, but this is what the league needs. I just worry about the fact that it's twice for the original 6 teams.
I do too. I do too. So, um, only time will tell. We'll see. I'm sure we won't hear anything again on this for a little while. I still am wondering, and one of the benefits of this is that they can change the expansion process because there is centralized ownership, right? Like if this was the NHL, just right, like equivalent league on the other side, where this would be, 2 to 4 expansion teams coming in after you just had 2 expansion teams. Let's say the NHL next year says we're adding 4 teams to it. Those are all going to have owners saying, okay, but we want the rules that the Kraken and Vegas had, right? Like they would demand that as part of the expansion fee that they're paying to enter this league. PWHL doesn't have to worry about that because it's all just owned by the PWHL. They can just do whatever they want. There is nobody who is spending $500 million to come into this league and then is going to demand to have the same treatment that the Torrent and Golden Eyes had when it comes to being able to put together a stacked roster on paper. And so I do think that that is one of the benefits that the PWHL has going for it that the traditional sports leagues don't have going for it, which is that centralized ownership. They can just change those rules based off of what they feel like is more appropriate kind of moving forward there. They can expand it out to 5 protection spots or something. And again, those expansion teams still get a lot of good players that way, but you're then allowing the existing teams and fan bases to still have a good core that they can kind of follow and support. So we'll see. Guesses on locations?
All right, so I think Denver and Detroit seem like the
They seem like
two
the for sure's, yeah.
leaders. Yeah. Beyond that, I don't know. I'm having like there aren't too many like sure things. I guess if you're gonna try and have more teams in the West, I do wonder about like Bay Area,
Mhm.
California, because it's not too far to the south, and I think that's an enthusiastic women's sports market. So I wonder about that. I would love to see it personally. Having
Mhm.
lived in the Bay Area for a time, and then I don't know. What do you think, Dylan?
I mean, I think if you're looking at making like a 6 team Western Conference, 6 team Eastern Conference, you probably need 3 of the 4 teams to join the West, and then you can have the Eastern Conference. And I think then you also have the interesting scenario of if Detroit is one of those places, De- is Detroit going to be in the East or the Western Conference? I mean, this is something the NHL has had to deal with in the past, where Detroit used to be a Western Conference team. It's now an Eastern Conference team. It is an Eastern time zone, so you, for the most part, would want to have it in the Eastern Conference. I really think that Denver, Detroit are the favorites because of how they performed during the takeover tour last year. Something that both Vancouver and Seattle performed very well in. I think the PWHL is largely going to just one for one. If you show up for a takeover tour and you show that there is a market in your city is now on our list, right? And I think that they want to go where the fans are and where the money is. And I think that Seattle and Vancouver were the obvious 2 places to do that first. I think Detroit, Denver have shown that they can be, and then I think we'll see for the rest of the takeover tour where else, you know, shows up for this, right? And I look at it and I look on the schedule for the takeover tour this year. There's a handful of places that are getting 2 games, and that is Detroit is getting 2 games, Denver is getting 2 games, Edmonton's getting 2 games. I wonder about Edmonton.
That could be interesting. I mean, they haven't shied away from going with Canadian markets, even one like Ottawa that's maybe a little bit smaller than, the big ones in Montreal and Toronto.
Yeah, the other one that it looks like is getting 2 games. There's one more, RJ.
I don't have
Oh,
it in
there's
front
two.
of
There's
me.
two more. There's Chicago, which also could potentially make a lot of sense. Big market, probably
Oh
find
yeah.
a good fan base there. Halifax. Let's get the
Ooh.
Maritimes in there.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, out east that far for travel, I don't know, but again, like they don't mind the coast to coast thing, right? But I mean, it'd be a very enthusiastic market. It would not be a larger market, but it'd be very enthusiastic, I think, and that would be, I guess, the bet that they'd be making. Interesting.
Yeah, but that is 5 locations that are going to have 2 takeover tour games this year. And so if you are expanding to 4 and this is something to kind of maybe get a read of interest on, I would think that Halifax is probably the odd city out in that group, but we'll see. I mean, the rest of those make sense though. Edmonton, Chicago, Denver, Detroit. You have Detroit be the Eastern Conference team out of those 3. That works.
Yeah, you could have, the East, Toronto, Ottawa, New York, Boston, Montreal, Detroit, and then the West, Seattle, Vancouver, Minnesota, Denver, Chicago, and Edmonton.
That sounds pretty good. You're covering good ground, good markets there. I think that's something that they should look at. So, yeah, that's gonna do it. We're gonna see. I'm very curious to see how the game in Dallas does as well. From an interest
Hmm.
standpoint, I'm really looking forward to that one. And of course, Seattle's going to be a part of that one, so we're going to be able to see that. They're going to take on New York at the end of this month, down there in Dallas, Texas, and of course, going to face New York here tomorrow. So looking forward to that game. Thanks, RJ, for joining, and we'll transition over to Charles now. All right, everyone. I'm joined here with Charles, circling Seattle sports, the man who is constantly circling Seattle sports. I mean, he is absolutely everywhere. I'm not going to ask you the question that everybody always asks you, which is, how do you do it? Because I'll let the mystery remain, and I know how much it bothers you. But you're always around everything. RJ and I have respected you for a very long time, and all the work that you do, and we are just so thrilled that we're going to be able to partner with you to cover the Seattle Torrent here on the podcast.
Well, Dylan, I could have just said the Capri Sun does it. That's what keeps you going. But I think that would be both of us. No, I mean, I've really enjoyed being around you and RJ. Obviously, you more the last few years as you've come up here. So I
You
don't
could
know.
just
It's
say
like,
meme in general. It's fine. RJ's not
well,
here.
yeah, yeah, he's not here. No, it's just days like today, specifically, right, where you can go a few feet away from looking at the Kraken practice to the Torrent practice. It's exciting, and obviously it'll be even more exciting to when hopefully the Torrent have things going and they've got their chemistry down, which is something I do want to speak about a little bit. I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but no, this is great, and excited that you and I have already been talking about this a ton before we even get in front of a microphone or a camera, right? So this should be great.
Yeah, no, definitely. So RJ and I have already covered some stuff. There's some stuff that I want to talk about with you, but really, I think we have to just start with, what are your thoughts on the 2 games that we have seen so far? Like, we have seen the Torrent actually play games. They're meaningful games, and we were able to view them. Charles, what have you thought of the team so far?
You mean we're not supposed to just go over the game box score that the PWHL provides, like the
We
scrimmage?
could, we could if you
No.
want to.
I, it's interesting because you look at 2 losses, and if you just look at them on the surface, you think, oh well, that's not great. This is a team that a lot of people, including I think us to an extent, have pumped up as a roster on paper that should do really great things and contend for a Walter Cup. I think you've seen the reality of the situation in terms of the expansion team. They've got to build chemistry, right? I think from night one in Vancouver, the turnovers were clear. The passing just there was not a ton of cohesion. And then in game two, there was a little bit of that, I think there was improvement, but it's still clear like that they're not there yet in terms of connectivity, and that's to be expected. It's I think it's totally unreasonable to think that they're gonna like to have your top line clicking, you know, your top six even. But I'm encouraged by the process, right? It's not they've just looked sloppy all over. It's there are some things, you know, even being on the press bridge that we talked about, right, where it's like they're doing the right things, they're getting in areas, you know, that you want to see them get into. Um, and I'm happy about the process. Being shut out's not great, but it's not like perhaps other teams that we've seen where you're being shut out and there are perhaps deeper concerns underlying there. So I think like head coach Steve O'Rourke keeps telling us, uh, you know, I'm believing in the process and looking at this, you know, being something that you build day in and day out. Maybe not super thrilled about relying on a late push deep into the season, right?
You
That
don't
he's
want
kind
to
of mentioning.
only be competitive the final month. That's
Yeah,
not.
just wait, like as if you're giving the other teams a head start. No, you know, I believe in the process because something I was going to mention with the chemistry is I think it was Megan Carter who talked about the other day we had an availability, um, and she talked about this group really starting to like each other, really buying in and providing tips, and that was just about the blue line. But I think you're starting to see it more. The players are in groups when they leave the building, when they enter the building. You know, it's just you can only build, you know, connections so quickly. But I do think they're really bought into that right away. And obviously it doesn't hurt to have some of the leaders that you do on this team, like Hillary Knight. You know, it's difficult to overlook that. So that's just my general blob on the first two
Mhm.
games. The process is encouraging to me at this point.
Yeah, RJ and I talked about it. Our panic meter is low. Sounds like you're in that same boat with us. And I think you bring up a good point about them kind of working on that communication, not just on the ice, because that tends to be where RJ and I focus on things, and this is where you bring a nice different perspective. But yes, they have been hanging out more and more just around KCI, leaving the building. You see them moving kind of in a pack, right? And like a team. And I think that that's very important, and that will definitely show up for the on ice product sooner rather than later. Again, super pumped for the game tomorrow night to kind of see if they can take that next step there. Um, Talk about the forward group, and because we'll get to the communication and the chemistry stuff, especially with the D in a second. But I want to talk about the forward group first. You look at especially like that first line, that top line with Alex Carpenter centering, Hillary Knight and Julia Gosling. RJ and I talked about them before. They play so well. They dominate possession. They're just all over the puck. Really force other teams back on their heels. I talked about earlier that they were just really unlucky in that game against Minnesota because it felt like they were just always in the Minnesota zone. And one of the things that I didn't mention, and I think that this is relevant for the team as a whole, but especially for that line, considering that they had 50% of the shots that the team took in that Minnesota game, the team shooting percentage for the Seattle Torrent group through two games, again, limited sample size, is dead last in the league, and it's like not even close. They are shooting at 5.3%. And
Oh,
yeah, it is not great. And so
huh.
that's something that is not going to stay that low, especially with the players that you have on this team. I refuse to believe that a team with Hillary Knight, Alex Carpenter, Julia Gosling, Hannah Bilka, right, that they're going to continue to shoot this low. I've talked about in the past though that shooting percentages in the PWHL a little bit lower than the National Hockey League. So, you would expect this to be like close more in the like 8.5% range probably. But it just goes to show that again, right now this is a team that offensively not getting a lot of bounces. The next lowest shooting percentage in the league with the Torrent at 5.3. The next lowest is Toronto at 6.8. It's a pretty big gap there. So I think that offense is going to come. But curious your thoughts on the forward group. You could pick any area that you want to talk about with that
Right.
forward group, but just kind of how they're playing right now. Cause I know some people might be concerned because the goals have not been prevalent.
Yeah, no, and I understand that, right? I mean, given the hockey teams in the city, I will try to not go so much back to that. I can understand it. Well, especially this past weekend where it's the double shutout. The frustration builds. It was interesting. I mean, talk about the bounces, right? There was one pass, I think, through the slot towards the end of the game against Minnesota, where I think it was Hillary Knight backdoor, and you just at that point you put your blade on the puck, and it went the exact wrong direction. You kind of wonder how in the world does that happen, right? I think, and maybe it's the same. Maybe that's why I've got this one track mind. When I say the process, I largely mean the offensive process because I'm not super worried about your blue line or your goaltender group. I think that group, when they build that chemistry, will hold you down when you need to, when it needs to. But this forward group, one thing that was interesting, they didn't get inside a lot against Minnesota, and I think this was something that we were like, hey, is Minnesota like a bigger team? The Frosts obviously are a different iteration than the group that's won the Walter Cup the last 2 years, but you're not really creating much traffic for Team USA's netminder and Nicole Hensley. I was a little curious about that, but no, it wasn't like this was a group against Minnesota that didn't generate anything, right? I mean, there were a few things where I'm just wondering, hey, I think you and I even talked about it today at practice. There were some shots where it was like Hillary Knight had a big shot towards the end of the third period there when Seattle's desperately trying to get something on the board. You say that's not saved most of the time. Just it's remarkable to me to watch Alex Carpenter play and see what she can do with the puck. The one thing I think that I'm still not necessarily like maybe situated with is Hannah Bilka playing on a different line than those two. I think we saw that line early in camp, and maybe it's just go with the familiarity starting out, right? But Julia Gosling, and you talked about this on your guys' Downpour episode, but then when you came on to our show, was Julia Gosling somewhat. You got to watch that shot. Sure enough, against Vancouver, you get the first one, which hey, you're gonna take it, but that second goal from her was remarkable. And she's graded out really well. So I'm kind of more than happy to leave that alone, honestly, that line. I think the other thing with the forward group is Danielle Serdachny. I mean, when Seattle signed her, and I think technically she was reported as the first player to sign. Obviously, the torrent make it so it's Hillary Knight. I understand it. I get it.
The
Um,
optics, the optics.
yeah, trust me, you be around it a little bit, you understand. But so much of the talk with Danielle was how much potential she had and not necessarily getting those looks, those minutes in Ottawa with the Charge. And just some watching her speed through the zone is really fascinating. And I think you and I talked about it after the Frost game, just going up against the Frost lines. I mean, the Frost are no slouch. They may have lost some players, but Taylor Heisey still gives me nightmares. You know, so it's I feel good about the process with this forward group. I'm not super worried about it. You mentioned the goals. I think largely because of the way that they were able to score against Vancouver, right? I mean, that Hannah Bilka goal to tie things up late is literally just her banking the puck off of Mashmeyer. Like, it's not pretty. You probably don't want to replicate that a lot, but it's just, hey, you need to get something, you need to get something greasy. I'm happy that they're trying that. They didn't get the bounces. The Frost are a good team. I guess my one concern is if you can't get inside consistently, then we need to talk, right? Then we need to have some conversations. But even the bottom six, right? I think we talked about is like, are you going to get any production out of that? At least in practice. And practice is one thing, but watching Brooke Bryant with the puck the last few days in practice, whether it's in the shootout or even her one timer, has been a lot of fun. So she's got some offensive ability. But yeah, that's where I'm at with that. I'm not super worried. If you can't get inside, though, then we need to have this conversation again later.
Right. And it's a little surprising because you would assume that a team that has I mean, players that are good inside and certainly players that have size up front. I mean, Julia Gosling, a lot of size there, and what she can do with that, in addition to the shot that she has. Hillary Knight, one of the best power forwards to play the sport of hockey, hands down, right? In her career and what she can do. Jesse Eldridge, great player, net front, and what she's able to do there on the second line. And so it is a little kind of confusing that they've struggled with that at times. And I think it was less of a struggle in that Vancouver game, right? You look at like the first Julia Gosling goal, kind of in there, getting a rebound. You talk about the Hannah Bilka goal there. I'm kind of, you know, reserving thoughts on that until we see them play, another game or two, just because,
Mhm.
yeah, Minnesota is a good team. They know what they're doing. I think that there was an element of they were very willing to give time and space kind of to the outside,
Mm.
something that RJ and I talked about earlier, willing to cede that ground because those are lower percentage chances. And, why wouldn't you? If you have to pick your poison against a team as deep as this Torrent group is, that's certainly what you want to give them kind of night in, night out. But we'll see if, New York's able to do that tomorrow and kind of handle things that way. Talking about the bottom six, because that's something that RJ and I did not talk about. And you highlight Brooke Bryant, player who, yes, through like skills drills these last couple days at practices has looked fantastic when given that time and space. And a player that I talked about the last time we had done a downpour kind of previewing the team, a player who was not getting a lot of playing time or prior to this year, but that trend has continued into this year as well, averaging about 4 minutes of ice time so far with this Seattle Torrent group, which is really not a lot. But a player that always has really high like game score per 60, right? A player who does show up when you're talking about making an impact on the ice in the limited sample size. And I do wonder how long that ice time number is going to stay. I mean, so low, like aggressively low. I'm really wondering about that because she really does feel like a player that's kind of primed for a breakout, or all she needs is that one, opportunity. I talk about like Julia Gosling, last year only had 4 goals, scores the two in the opener for the Seattle Torrent. Just kind of needed to be in a slightly different spot and be given a slightly different opportunity. We're still waiting on that breakout from Serdachny. Now that she
Mhm.
has the opportunity here, I am very curious about Brooke Bryant getting that opportunity and getting that performance there. But so far, the bottom six, they're doing what they need to do largely, right? Which is go out there and just try to win the matchups against other teams. Bottom six, it feels like Steve O'Rourke, at least through that Minnesota game, especially content to have the Serdachny line kind of be more of a shutdown line and kind of
Mm.
have the tough matchups. So that means that this bottom six can really just try to focus on being physical, something Steve O'Rourke's mentioned a lot about and wanting from his group. And sure enough, they are. You look at them all, hits per 60 in the green on the master sheet, right? They are above average when it comes to being physical players out there. They're blocking shots as well as forwards. So they're doing the job that they need to do. And I think that if that's the identity of this team, of we got this top six, we're going to let them kind of drive the boat and drive the bus, and you're going to have to deal with them. And then when you think you're going to get a reprieve, guess what? We have this other group that's going to come out there and they just want to smash your face in. And it kind of feels like that's the way that Steve O'Rourke's role in this group.
Right, and that, when you talk about that, it's that was one of the things Lexia Gia mentioned, particularly when we had her. I think leading up to the Minnesota game was her that I think at least on the listed depth chart that we get before games, right? Her Natalie Snodgrass, the two wings to Michaela Grant Mentis's line, two physical players. She said she likes being in the being in the corner. So does Nat. I think she mentioned that in the Vancouver game, there were a few instances where they both like being in the corner that led to them both in the corner, which obviously you don't want at the
Yep.
same time. So that's pretty interesting. And someone, at least going further into the bottom six, right, with Jenna Buglione, she's not big. She's not, at least like we're talking about Agia and Snodgrass. She's on the smaller side of things, but at least through 2 games, and thankfully she does seem to be practicing after she was listed as day to day. It's an upper
Mhm.
body injury, right? Um, she's not afraid of anything. Like she's
She's throwing the
fearless.
body around so
She's
far through
throwing
the
the
first two
body.
games.
in the first game, it results in a penalty early on. Thankfully, the PK, which is interesting to me. We talk about the forward groups, right? And I understand there's more than just the forwards, but the power play is 0 for 3 so far. I think you can kind of look at that with the chemistry side of things, right? Good power plays are together consistently, right?
Mhm.
But the PK is 5 for 6. Like they're doing their job. They've been tested pretty consistently early on. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, sorry, I was looking at that. But yeah, Jenna, I mean, I've been impressed both on and off the ice, how she carries herself. You know, this is a rookie, but she comes from an Ohio State program that's really deep. And throwing a body around is not what I expected from her. But hey, it's as you mentioned with Steve O'Rourke and how he at least tells us that he wants this group to play, perfectly fitting that.
Right. And it felt like through camp that her line was going to be kind of the third line. And I think like the idea was to have the top six be that talented top six, and then you have that line of Jenna Buglioni with Mariah Wagner and Brooke Bryant as like another still skilled line that can go out there and try to play with speed and do that sort of thing. But through the first two games anyway, that is the line that is very much definitively the fourth line for this group as far as usage, the ice time that they're
Right.
getting out there, and I think that some of that is because of the level of competition that you've played. You've played Vancouver, great team on paper, still trying to figure it out like this Torrent squad is, and then you've played the back-to-back champions, and so we have seen that Grant Mentis, Aegea Snodgrass line get substantially more ice time than the other line and go out there and try to play that way. And so it'll be interesting to see if like over time that line with younger players, Brooke Bryant, Wagner, Buglioni, right? Younger players still looking for those opportunities to break out and prove themselves. If that line starts getting more ice time, once you're not having to run through a buzzsaw of like top teams in the league, right? So it'll be interesting to see that. You mentioned the PK. And this was the other talking point that I wanted to make sure to get in here
Mm.
with you, and that is discipline. Because this is a Seattle team that has taken 3 penalties through each of their 2 games so far. So six times they have had to go on the PK. Only allowed one power play goal out of the 6 opportunities. But you look at that compared to the opportunities they're getting on the power play, only 3 power play opportunities. So, you are talking about taking twice as many penalties as you are receiving right now. And that feels like a trend that you probably want to stop at some point.
Yeah, it's interesting because, and not to go back to it, but this was something that we talked to Megan Carter yesterday. She was asked about, she talked about her physical game. That's one of her big game pillars of her game is physicality, being a big body, stronger person, kind of, playing into that, and that's
Mhm.
it's not bad, right? But yeah, you talk about the discipline side of things. You don't want to put yourself at a constant disadvantage. I mean, Minnesota, particularly, again, Taylor Heisey, as someone who watched Boston particularly a lot the last 2 years in the WHL, I don't like seeing that group out there. The Minnesota Frost power play, that is. So it was interesting, just to go back to the quote that she had when asked about the discipline of the physicality, like how do you balance those things and be situationally aware, right? Her answer, she talked about, I think definitely focus is a big aspect of it. She mentioned good IQ, being aware of the play around you. So didn't kind of differentiate anything, but said it's just it all kind of falls together. So there's nothing too juicy there, but it's a good point. I
Mhm.
mean, yeah, something it's interesting. We're looking at the Sirens game, right? Because you and I were talking about it a little bit today with what we're expecting, I think, tomorrow. This is a New York team that's young. They got gutted in the expansion
Yeah, they
draft in
did.
the signing window, but at least in 2 of their 3 games, they've put up good goal totals. And the one game they lost is against a Victoire team that has some of the best players in the world in this league. And Pooh, they got Abby Roque, if I remember correctly,
Mhm.
and that's scary to think about. And then you've got Henri Debian, who I think, looking at game score, is the best player in the league right now.
Yeah.
So I'm a little intrigued to see how this game goes. Um, young, talented, skillful could create problems if you're a PK and you give them goodness forbid you give them 3 power play opportunities as you have already these 2 games you've played. It's a good question, right?
Yeah.
Because what are the things that we've heard consistently with it? Not even before O'Rourke came here, but I believe when Megan Turner was named the general manager, talked about speed and physicality. Those are things that, if you're not disciplined, will put you in trouble.
It's
Um,
certainly not going to let you play fast and physical if you're having to kill off a bunch of penalties, right? Like that is one
right.
of those things that's going to disrupt that momentum you're trying to build.
So it's not a trend I'd like to see continue. Is the 3
Yes.
PKs a
Yeah.
game?
Yeah. And we'll see how they deal with that. And I do think that this is you have the great quote there from Carter where she's talking about the focus aspect of it. And I do think that because the blue line is so new and they're building that chemistry and they're working on that communication, that you're having to think about those things still, right? It is not intuitive for them. It is not normal for them. They still are working on understanding and knowing each other's tendencies, especially like right now you have Kayla Barnes playing with Emily Brown. The Terralova
Mhm.
injuries kind of shuffled things around. So it's not even like Barnes is playing with Wilgren, somebody who she already does have that history with, right? And so I do think it is one of those things where you probably aren't able to then focus on making sure that every little thing you're doing is
Mm,
clean, or there's times where you're thinking about that communication aspect instead of having it just kind of be run on instinct, and
mm,
now the play has gotten a little bit ahead of you and now you're chasing the play a little bit, and that's where we see penalties. So it does feel like it is kind of coming from the overall issue of just everybody being new together and dealing with those things for the most part. So hopefully it stops here in the next little bit. Only have like a little bit of time here left. We'll continue and have like a post pod conversation on your channel, Circling Seattle Sports, after this. But I want to talk to you about the goaltending that
mm.
we've seen so far, and get your takes on what Schroeder has done in net so far, because that's really the one aspect of the team that up to this point RJ and I didn't really talk about it. You and I haven't talked about it yet, but I think Schroeder absolutely deserves to be talked about here on the pod.
Right. I think that was one of the first things that really excited me with this franchise in general. When we got an idea, when they started making, like, obviously Hillary Knight's going to take, again, I'm not going to be one that downplays Hillary Knight. I think
Yeah.
this market should enjoy Hillary Knight as long as she wants to be here. But getting Corinne Schroeder, funny enough, one of the first games I watched in the PWHL for like from front to back was Corinne Schroeder shutout. And so I was sucked in. I was like, this player's great. Let's
Yeah,
go. I love
that'll
go.
do it.
So, getting her I thought was so big because don't get me wrong. And you and I talked about, hey, when do we see the first non-Schroeder start for this group? Because I was like, hey, I believe in the 2 others in the trio as well with CJ
Hmm.
Jackson, who we've talked about, and I think you guys talked about in the first episode of the Downpour, was someone who probably earned more starts with the Scepters in Toronto,
Yeah.
and Hannah Murphy, who had a stellar career at Colgate University and wore a letter, which is always fascinating to see a C on a goalie. Um, yeah, I think the first 2 games have been tough because and this is all going back to a lot of the problems I think or potential issues that could come up with this team will be solved as the season goes on with them knowing each other, having that second like that instinct of okay, I know who to trust. I know, if I'm Kayla Barnes, I know Wilgren's going to be there, or if I play enough with Emily Brown, I know what her tendencies are going to be, right? The passes that some of these players are looking for down the ice. It's funny that you and RJ talked about some of these stretch passes because Hillary Knight was right in front of us today and she was
She's working
trying
on it.
passing. I'm like, hey man, that's hilarious. My point though, right, is I'm in a positive world because as you know, I try to have hope in my heart. There's still
Hmm.
hope in me
Yeah.
that some of these issues should be fixed as this group learns each other more, and they don't have the same obstacles to do that as the Kraken did when they began. It's not like there's COVID restrictions and stuff like that. This group, I think, really is working on being around each other. The team has posted the scavenger hunt they did. They come in
Mhm.
as I mentioned. So like, but this is another thing that I think will be fixed with that is the defending in front of Corinne Schroeder. There have been so many instances, particularly the starts of games, right? It seems like Vancouver and Minnesota, from what I remember watching, came in with a flurry early on,
Yeah.
and Schroeder just absorbed it all instantly. She had some saves throughout the rest of the game, both instances. And there were a few where I had kind of like earmarked them or wrote them down, like, hey, you're going to want to go and look back at this later, if they pull this one out, which unfortunately they haven't done yet. But it's difficult, right? Even after the third one against Minnesota, where that was the one power play goal that they've given up, where was it Grace Zumwinkle, sister
Mhm.
of Emily Zumwinkle,
Yep.
got that puck up onto the roof of the goal that had to be reviewed. It was a whole thing. Where you could argue she needs to cover that one up.
Yeah.
Sure, I get it, but
And O'Rourke mentioned that even kind of
yeah,
after the
I
game.
asked Steve O'Rourke. I said, "Hey, what have you seen from your goaltending? And largely goaltending is Corinne Schroeder. Um, I think she's looked the part of the steady veteran that you're going to want with this group. Um, because otherwise you've got CJ who had the one start and the two appearances last year, which is
Mhm.
not to disparage CJ. It's just a matter of fact in terms of play time, right?
Yep.
And then Hannah Murphy was coming up from the college ranks, and we saw Hannah Murphy today. She's working with the goalie coach, looking over film. Like she wants to learn, but obviously there's going to be a jump there. So it's hard for me to put a lot of blame on Corinne Schroeder, given what she's had to absorb and deal with early on. I think she's giving you the like steady play that you should need, but obviously there's work being done in front of her that she's currently having to deal with. Hopefully, you get later on into this late season push that Coach
Yeah.
O'Rourke keeps talking about. She won't have to deal with that, and she deals with these lower danger chances, and it's just like, oh, perfect, easy.
Yeah.
You're not going to worry about it. That's
Yeah.
where I'm at with it.
I'm largely there with you. I think a lot of it is I, with a worse goaltender, this situation would look so much worse, right?
Right.
Like I think it's really a testament to her ability and how good she is that things really haven't gone off the rails at certain points during some of these games. As you mentioned, able to make the big saves early on, keep the team in it while they're trying to figure things out, right, and come together. And so I think that that has been a big part of it is her ability to, she's big. She takes up a lot of the net. She's able to stay strong, especially lower part of the ice. She uses her pads extremely well. I think that all of that has been really beneficial to her for those moments where the D has that lack of communication. The other teams are able to get to the inside on her, right? They're able to get at those rebound opportunities and chances, and she's been able to stand tall and deal with those. I think that she's not playing like herself. And like that's the one part about this that concerns me is like I watch her and she's having to play deeper in her crease because of those
Mhm.
things, right? Because the plays are kind of breaking down. She's having to play more conservative. She's having to play further back in her crease. And I think that she, at least based off of what I'm remembering from watching her in New York, that's not totally her style. Like there's an element of that. Like she is still a little bit more of a positional goaltender, use her size, use her length, right, to make those saves. But she's having to play extremely conservative right now because of the way the team in front of her is playing. And I do think that as that stuff in front of her improves, she's going to be able to play more aggressive. And then you're going to start seeing her make some of those saves or be in more of a spot to cover loose pucks like that
Right.
one, right? Like I do think that that was part of it was she wasn't able to totally cover it because she was just having to really worry about defending that goal line like very very much just actually on top of the goal line and defending it because of how collapsed the play had gotten in front of her
Oh
in a
yeah.
way that you don't normally want to see. And so I think that that's been largely the issue there. It has nothing to do with her and her ability. It's strictly just that she's having to play more conservative because the D in front of her is at times making mistakes because of how new they are with each other and the lack of chemistry and all of that kind of stuff. So that's kind of what I've noticed from watching her and having watched her in the past and stuff, is just that it feels like she's not able to fully go for it and fully be herself, because she's kind of having to make up a little bit for what the team in front is lacking at times.
Right. And, again, that stuff like that, aspects of that, seeing that this isn't a situation where it's like, this is the rock bottom. It's very bad. There aren't a lot of
Yeah.
ways to get out of it. Seeing that there is a pathway forward to success is why I'm so positive. Is
Hmm.
because, hey, you've got somebody who's, kind of overcompensating, I guess, in a way. You get through the season, the deep hairs are a little bit more in tune. There maybe aren't as many. So I think someone in one of our comments was like, just hopeful passes into the slot and into the crease that somebody will be there. Hopefully somebody's at the end of those things. Like, I don't think those are issues that persist throughout the course of the season. If they do, and you and I are talking about this towards the end of the regular season, things have gone horribly wrong.
Right.
Right. We are in disaster mode. And, then it's okay. I don't want to keep rambling because I know I got to cut it here. But, it becomes, hey, you had your potentially one shot with this group to chase a Walter Cup, because there's this impending further expansion,
Expansion, yep.
right? And who knows who will want to stay? Who knows what the rules will be for expand, if they'll run it back,
Hmm.
but just with all 8 teams. You know, Hillary Knight and Alex Carpenter are signed for the one season, so you could lose 2 of your top line players. That could all be for naught. I'm not saying it's win the Walter Cup or bust this year, but when you're positioned this well, I'd be remiss to say go for it,
Yeah.
right? Because at the end of the day, Hillary could just play the one last season. She's playing the Olympics, and then she's done with international play. She wins Walter Cup here, and then it's all right. I can finish it. I've got medals, and I've got a Walter Cup. I'm done. Then we can do this at the parade or whatever they do.
Yeah, exactly.
Easy.
No.
There you go. We're planning ahead.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's going to be a lot of fun to see how the rest of the season goes. Again, not too concerned with the fact that, 1-1. It's fine. It was very understandable. I mean, I've been warning people all along on our content. They're going to start slow. Expansion team, it is going to start slow, but they are going to be good in the long run. Just got to be patient with them. I think most fans are. Last thought on Schroeder has the mask. We have seen the mask. You've gotten very close to the mask. Got to talk with her about the mask, and we'll have an article up later today on your website, Circling Seattle Sports, going in depth in the mask with pictures.
Yes. We've got pictures of the bad boy.
Yes. So if you want to hear the story of the mask and really go over everything from Corinne Schroeder herself, check out circlingseattlesports.com later today. I think that's going to do it for this episode of the Downpour. We'll record a little something for your YouTube channel after this, but want to thank everybody so much for joining us. Thank you, Charles. Really looking forward to this partnership for covering the Seattle Torrent. Until next time,